Hi, welcome to Healing Humanity. My name is Dina, and I want to talk to you today about staying strong when you feel like God is silent in your life. We all go through it, right? I mean, every one of us. We all have stresses and things that are terrifying sometimes, or accidents that might occur, and losses that could occur. It could be losses in our own lives. It could be people that we lose. Whatever is going on, it feels like God has just left us, that we don't understand what's happening or why He's not there. Why are we under such judgment, or why are so many bad things happening? And I've had a lot of things go on in my life, and it reminded me. Um, well, let me share this with you first before I tell you a little bit about mine. So I just finished this book by a woman I met at church. She's becoming a friend of mine, and her name is Dana Y. Jackson. And it's called, I don't know if you can see that straight, but it's the three H's: hurting, healing, and helping. So it's the three H's: hurting, healing, and helping. And if I can find the link for it, I think it's on Amazon. If I can find the link, I'll put it in the information program description. It was a great book. It was about when things are not going well, when your life is turned upside down, and you go through all of these chaotic and traumatic things. She was telling a little bits and pieces of her story, and how she stayed in prayer even when things went terribly wrong. She still stayed in prayer, and by doing so, things started to progress. You could start to feel a little bit better about all of the trauma and the troubles that are going on. And it's important for us when we're going through these hard times to not only get through them ourselves and to heal ourselves, but to help others to heal as well. And one of the things that she said in her story, and I want to read this to you because I thought it was really profound and it makes sense. So she says, it's sort of like when we were kids and our parents took us to great adventures or to Disney World. The sign read 50 more miles. We kids got excited. Then maybe a sign read 5 miles. Then we really got excited. Can you imagine if our parents had seen the last sign and stopped driving? Mom, Dad, why did you stop driving? We would cry from the back seat. And they would say, this is close enough. We would have just gone ballistic, she says. And she follows up with, even though you are not crying as much and things seem better than, and you see the light at the end of the tunnel, stay in the presence of God. Don't abandon what God has been doing, because that's what a lot of us do, right? We earn the money, we build the business, um, we have the family, we've got the great kids, things are moving and progressing, we're going to college, or whatever it is that you're striving to do in your life. You get to that point and it's like, oh, this is good enough. You pray your way through it. Things might be stressful, they might be difficult. You're praying and you're praying and you're praying, and you're hoping to God that He's listening and will help you and or your family to get through the troublesome times, right? To heal you, to heal what's going on around you. She says, so if you have to cry, let it out. It brings you closer to the light. There is light at the end of the tunnel. And I can assure you that there is. Out of out of her book, I just loved that part in there. It's not a big book, but I really recommend. It's a quick read, and I really recommend people taking a moment and reading through it, because it makes you think about all the things that happen, that we pray to God and we hope for deliverance, or we hope for miracles, or um, glorification or benefit from God. But once we see that, and we see even just a small glimpse, we get that 5 miles away sign, and we know that we're within safe distance. We stop. We don't pray anymore. We don't bother continuing down the road, And and I think that's where we fail ourselves, and we fail God, because this is a long game. This isn't something that just happens overnight. We have to continue with Him, and we have to walk the path with Him to be able to reach ultimate salvation with God. You know, it's not an overnight deal. It's something that takes a long, long time, and it takes effort. And we have to continue that walk with Him. You know, we can't just get what we want and say, hey, thanks, see you later. You know, we can't just get almost to the end and then just stop the car and not continue on, like she says. You know, stop at that 5 mile mark and say, oh, we're close enough to Disney World. We don't need to go any further. Who would say that, right? And that's exactly what heaven is. Heaven is our Disney World. Heaven is our great adventure. And we ought to think of our path onto that end as a great adventure, whether it's stressful or not. You know, I think of a time where it was back-to-back hospitalizations for a couple family members of mine, and one was my youngest daughter, and the next was my husband at the time. And God, she was born. 2 weeks later, she ended up in the hospital. She caught a cold. They call it RSV, but and what it is basically a cold and a cough in adults, typically in January up north, and it hits adults with a pretty raspy cough, but it goes away because we're strong enough and able enough to get through it. Well, my daughter was born with a cleft palate, and that in itself was a troublesome thing, and we were constantly, you know, assessing and going to doctors and trying to figure out what the best plan to repair that for her was. So we were on the trajectory for that. Then she caught this RSV and wound up in hospital, and she was in there for about 2 weeks, and I nearly lost her several times, my husband and I, and it was so stressful and so overwhelming. And I found myself in the hospital chapel over and over again. When people couldn't find me, that's where I was, and praying for her deliverance, and praying for her life, and making sure that, you know, God protected her. And in the end, come to find out, because she was born, and I feel like this is God's plan, right? Because she was born with the cleft palate, she came out of the RSV, was able to be saved because of that. And I don't really know how that relates. I guess probably because it opened her breathing a little bit better than if she didn't have that, which to me was an amazing miracle. So out of the bad came the good, right? And it saved her life, and I was able to bring her home. But she was a little bit challenged because she was eating like every 3 hours, and because of the cleft palate, she couldn't eat laying down. So I constantly had to like hold her almost sitting up like a toddler to be able to feed her just the bottle as a baby. So it was every 3 hours. It was very tiresome. And I prayed all the way through it. You know, in my mind, I didn't have the chapel to go to because I was at home, but God, in my mind, I just remember praying and praying and praying and hoping that everything just worked out for the best. And in the end, it did. But she wasn't home 2 weeks. So keep in mind, she's born, going through this process with doctors and plastic surgeons to help figure out what to do with her cleft palate. And then she ends up with this RSV, was in the hospital for 2 weeks, comes home, she's home for 2 weeks, and my ex-husband goes to the hospital. He got in an accident and never returned one night. He went out one night and never returned. And he did not pass away, but he was in hospital for 2 weeks. Almost lost him a couple different times. And he was in a coma for several, I think for at least a week or so, maybe a little bit more. And when people couldn't find me, again, I was in hospital chapel just trying to pray my way through it and hoping that God delivered him, and there was fear that he wouldn't be the same. And we got very lucky because he, although he was a little bit different, his memory was there, his ability to function was there overall. And so I feel like the prayers really helped and helped work through that. But then, of course, life comes around and gets busy, and we I lost sight. I lost sight of the prayers. I lost sight of holding that space for others, and I feel like at some point in my life I came to that 5 mile an hour, 5 miles down the road sign, and I stopped until I got sick myself. I let life take over. And part of that is we as a society let life take over, right? I know I've mentioned this once before. When I was younger, played sports. We never had games on Sundays ever. I do not recall any one of my friends having games on Sundays. Perhaps they did. Maybe there was a track meet here or there. But I really don't recall ever playing games on Sundays. But you know what I noticed today, actually, in church, was my phone rang as I'm sitting in church on a Sunday morning. And it was from some private number. It's going to be a you know, um, stupid call. And some telemarketer or something. And I thought, wow. And I thought, okay, well, they're not going to call back because I, put the call to voicemail. They called back. I hadn't turned my phone off. I was so mad. And I remember growing up, it was sort of a faux pas. It was not okay to make phone calls before noontime on Sunday. Does anybody else remember that? I mean, honestly, we could not make phone calls before noontime on Sunday because people were. That time was time for your family. It was time for relaxation. It was time for worship and for lunches and going to church. It wasn't time to bother people, and I feel like we've lost all of that. We've all gotten to that 5 mile down the road sign and said, "This is enough. We're not going to do any more." And that's not what God is calling us to. God is calling us to drive the full length to get to, his kingdom, to get to the magic kingdom that is waiting for all of us. But we can't do it if we live with disrespect, if we live with not healing one another, not walking in love for one another, judging and wanting and desiring of other people. Um, like I said, we build the things that we want to build in our lives, and then we stop, or we pray the prayers that we want to pray, like I did with my family, and then we stop. We get what we want, but we don't give God what he wants. And so what does he want? He wants you and me, all of us, to get to his kingdom, to be in the magic kingdom with him. And it's available for all of us. But we have to keep walking the walk. We cannot just stop and think that, it's just going to come to us, because it's not. I can assure you that this path is, it's a long road. It's that 50 miles down the road kind of thing. It takes a while, and but we have to live in his word. We have to perform our lives as if he's standing with us every single day. As a matter of fact, I wasn't always the best person with my ex-husband. I cheated, and I shouldn't have, but I did. And when we ended that relationship, we were friends, but we ended the relationship. And I remember thinking, getting into a new relationship, I'm going to be I'm going to walk in life as if he's standing next to me, whoever that he might be at that time. I'm going to walk as if he's standing next to me at all times. And that's how I was able to stay true and never, repeat those same behaviors, to be honorable and to walk in, God's plan for my life, not man's. And I'm glad that I did that. I was able to change the way I walked in the world, quite drastically, and thank God for that. And I think that that's how we can change our lives, and to get to that magic kingdom with God is to always walk as if he's standing next to us, because honestly, he is. He is right here with us every single moment of every single day, 365 days a year. And by keeping that open mind 365 days a year, 24/7, we're able to live a more honorable and a more just and a more peaceful life, that we can show up in love and know that we're not being walked over, we're not being taken advantage of, we're not being harmed in any way, because God has our back. Because when you truly trust in that, when you trust in the sentence, God has my back, you cannot fail. Ultimately, you cannot fail. So, I don't know. I guess I would just say that, he has a plan, such a bigger plan for all of us. And nobody, not a single one of us, understands all of it. Everybody out here wants something different and desires something different. And can you imagine all of the things that he has to change and rearrange to make sure that everybody gets what it is that they are desiring, or to the best of his ability, give us what we are desiring. And, as long as it goes along with his plan, we should be able to attain what it is that we're looking for. But he won't do that if we're not driving those extra miles to get to the kingdom, if we're not putting him first, if we're not walking as if he's standing next to us every single minute of every single day. I would just say, I encourage you to take a moment and think about that. I really loved her analogy of driving down the road with her parents and, going to Disney World, and then the parents stopping at that sign says 5 miles down the road, and that's good enough. You don't have to go any further. Wow, that's so profound, honestly, because who wouldn't go crazy if your parents did that? So why are we doing it to ourselves? Why are you doing it to yourself? You built the business, you have the money, you've got the home, you've got the kids, everybody's doing well. You're at that 5-mile sign. The kingdom, the magical kingdom, is right down the road. Are you ready to get there? Are you ready to continue driving down that road? I hope so. I know I am. I am. I don't think there'll ever be a time in my life in the future where I will not, if not verbally, in my mind, be praying to God for others, for myself, for the world. I think it's important for all of us to think about that, to think about not only ourselves, but the world at large. Because there's a lot of suffering out here. There's a lot of people that are hurting, and they sure could use your prayer. So I hope you keep driving. I hope you make it to the Magic Kingdom.